And speaking of being made for more, Visionary Broadband has lived that idea in action, serving more than 100 communities and over 20,000 subscribers across Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. They continue to do more every day, even when the work is complex, rural, and anything but easy. Please join me in welcoming Brian Worthen, CEO of Visionary Broadband, and his panelists to the stage for the Champion Doer Model, Unlocking Fiber Deployment Through Local Partnership.
Okay. We were warned about this microphone. Thank you, everybody. I'm Brian Worthen, the CEO of Visionary Broadband. We're based in Wyoming, and we do some of the hard things. We started as a dial-up company in 1994, and we grew on grit and determination. But enough about me. I wanted my panelists to take a minute or two to talk about what they do, what they spend their time on, and what they're going to lend to the panel today.
Good morning. I'm Farley, Visionary Broadband. I'm our Director of Regulatory Affairs, and I primarily, for purposes of today's discussion, help with establishing our access to the right-of-ways in the communities that we operate, whether that be a right-of-way agreement or franchise agreement, and our pole attachment JUAs with local utilities.
Good morning, my name is Rob Johnstone, CEO of Range. We're headquartered in Forsyth, Montana, in the southeast portion of the state. We have a service area of about 30,000 square miles in southeast Montana, across the state of Wyoming, northern Colorado, and western South Dakota.
What about now? Yeah? Okay. I'm Sarah Smith. I'm the Chief of Staff, and I think you call me the unsiloer. Is that the right?
Unsiloer.
Yeah. So I help manage the internal operations for Visionary, make sure things are running smoothly and all of the pain points are being removed so we can serve our customers faster, more efficiently, better customer service.
Folks, I think it's pretty fitting that we had the mayor of Bozeman up here when the Fiber Broadband Association contacted me about running the panel. I thought, what would be the topic? And the topic that I think that is important for everyone here to understand is there's a champion within every community, and they've got to find a doer. There are fiber providers out there, and you heard Gary talk about that this morning, and there are even new fiber startups, but there's this dance that has to happen with the local community. There's a dance that has to happen with a town council, a town board, a city council. And what's interesting is everybody learns that on the fly. The world is the test bench, and you have to build a relationship in order to access rights of way, in order to access the community, and to make that investment in that community. And we're going to talk about that today, but the concept here is there's a champion within the community that says we want this here. But the community then has to make sure that the fiber provider they're meeting with is a doer. And that could be a private company that is an overbuilder, it could be a phone company, it could be someone that does middle mile. How do they find who that doer is? So we'll talk about that today. The fiber overbuilders are typically privately owned, but they can also be a muni network like you see here in Bozeman. They can be an independent phone company, which is where Rob's background is. And what's interesting is they could be actually a small town provider based right here, or in Broadus, Montana, or Miles City, Montana, or Whitehall, Montana. There's someone that grabs that opportunity. But how does that company work with the community or find that community, and how does that community reach out to someone like that Sarah, I'd like to draw on your background first. If you could talk a little bit about where you came from prior to Visionary, and then talk about your work at the NTIA and why you were on a roadshow early on in the BEAD process to recruit.
Yeah, sure. So I got my start in broadband in the state of Colorado. I worked in the broadband office for FirstNet Colorado, way back in the day, that the 911 planning for redundant networks for PSAPs. And through that work, I started to understand the necessity for broadband, ubiquitous broadband across the United States. And I got offered the opportunity to work at the NTIA. And one of the things that the NTIA was really focused on was building community-based relationships for stakeholders and the state and ISPs and pole owners, all of the different pieces that that come into building a successful network that actually delivers the service that the end user needs. So when I was brought onto the NTIA, they asked me to serve Wyoming, and actually Lucas, Zach is here as well. He and I did a road trip together to Wyoming, which is where I met Brian. And the goal of this trip was to really have an opportunity to bring together the local partners who are in their communities building the access that their community needs, and the officials that are going to help shepherd that process. And that's the key word, shepherd, is that they really wanted to encourage a strong partnership between ISPs, the community that they're serving, and the public officials whose responsibility it is to make that passage smoother. And so we went all over Wyoming. I met providers from all over, and we hosted a local gathering in Gillette with Brian and a number of the other providers there to try and bring as much community and engagement and collaboration around the BEAD program as possible.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Rob, I have a little bit different question for you. What year did Range and RT start?
1953 for Range.
Okay, so you've got a relationship with the community for quite a while. Is that just inherent, or does that take work? What does that look like for you?
So I love the topic of partnerships for one thing, and I really think it's at the core of what the definition of a cooperative is. And in 1953, that's what Range started out as a telephone cooperative, which the conversation, as with most cooperatives, not only around Montana, but around the rural parts of this country, was people gathering because of the need for communication services. So in our case, it was groups of ranchers and farmers getting together. What's it going to take to get ourselves telephone service? And that's kind of the ultimate partnership at that point in time that has led to what we talk to now, of course, on a broadband scale and beyond. But of course, that means we've had these long-lasting relationships, and they're very valuable to us, and we always keep them at the forefront of our conversations. So we have in all of our cooperative areas, as well as in Wyoming with our patrons, the involvement in the community level goes beyond just the conversations around broadband and communication services. It's being a valued partner and pitching in the areas we serve with economic development, volunteerism, kind of this mentality of whatever it takes to continue to make our small communities viable.
Thanks, Rob. And it's sponsoring a local youth sports team, I would imagine.
For sure. There's a lot of that.
Kyle, could you speak to visionary projects that have taken place in Montana and how those were funded and what those look like?
Yeah, so in the work that I've done in Montana, specifically two communities, from the minor, going to be our Whitehallville and our Bills in Hardin. Both of those funded with capital project funds. And two very different approaches and outcomes there in terms of how we approach that and worked with those communities. In particular, how we gathered and started that communication with access to those right-of-ways. In Hardin, typically we talk about finding the champions, and those champions are typically, your city council, they want that investment in their communities, the city business owners, those operating. But to get to the champions, at least in my role, it's starting with, well, who's the gatekeeper of the information? And oftentimes that's a city clerk that holds all the information, the keys to the castle. And so that's where we like to start those conversations. And if you can get off on the right foot, they'll help you navigate those waters of who to be working with, who to talk to, who's going to get you to your champions. In Hart, we looked at it. We always start that conversation, what needs to be in place in order for us to come in and build our infrastructure here. What do you need from us? What can we supply for you? How can we be involved? Because once again, it's how do we shepherd you through this process? I always say it's not us coming in and telling you what needs to be done, but how can we walk with you through this? And so, Hardin was in a situation where they wanted fiber. They wanted us there, and in terms of right of way, we didn't need to put anything in place there. They were just applying for permitting and allowing us to build there, but also working closely with what our plans would do. Whitehall was a little bit of a different situation. You're going to have this from small town, smaller communities. They may operate different than other communities. In Whitehall, it was a situation where the last time they'd even touched a franchise agreement was probably 20, 30, 40 years ago to put that in place. And so you get through the clerk and you start working through it. You finally make your way to a town attorney who hasn't worked on one of these before. And sometimes that's some of the hardest conversations to have is you may not know everything. And that's exactly what an attorney wants to hear, right? So, it may not be right. And so having that conversation, we had to start there, and that's a delicate conversation, but ultimately we were able to be successful in that. And that approach was interesting, and it was a municipal-wide right-of-way agreement we ended up putting into place there. So those two communities, both successful. We've both been successful in those from Visionary's perspective, but two very different approaches, and ultimately access to those rights-of-ways and how that works.
Thanks, Cal. I appreciate that. And in these small towns, I'm not sure everybody understands, the attorney is often part-time and practices law the other half of the day. Rob, have you had that experience? I want to give you a chance to talk about Range's projects. You've worked with many projects in newer communities in Wyoming recently, and you've also got new projects in Montana.
Yeah, very similar experience. I will say the process of working, especially with our cities and towns, has improved a lot over the last 5-6 years. Just the sense of urgency of communities needing these fiber builds taking place for their infrastructure, whether that's trying to attract new business into the community. We have a critical care hospital in Forsyth, for example. The connectivity there, of course, on everything that they run out of that hospital depends on fiber. So it's become a lot more expeditious as far as the process. And to your point on kind of the gatekeepers in some of these towns and cities, that has improved a lot to where we're not finding as many roadblocks as we once did before. I won't talk about state or federal level, but in the local level, it's been a pretty smooth process both in Montana and Wyoming.
Can you speak to one of your projects recently and how that went with the local community?
Yeah, we wrapped up here recently 2 ARPA-funded projects that we did in Montana, in Forsyth and Colstrip. And I would say the town, the local governments, the towns, the counties, they were our biggest champions with support at the state level as the rules were being developed on which projects were going to get funded and at what level. So that there again is another example of a critical partnership we need to take the time to develop.
Thanks, Bill. Sarah, I'm going to spring a question on you that's unplanned. You ready?
Yes.
You have been in public service for quite a while, and you came on to Visionary. What's the most interesting thing you've seen being on the private side of the house with regards to developing relationships, going into new communities? What have you noticed? What stance is required?
I think the most interesting thing is actually the goal is the same. So the goal as a public servant is to really serve the community and bring a really critical need to the community, make it available. And that's the same in the private industry. There's, especially in these, sort of more regional providers, it's really, Visionary lives and works in the communities that we're building to. And we truly believe that what we're providing is a necessary service. And we're always coming from that standpoint. And I'm sure that's true for Range as well, that, we really are focused on meeting our community where they are. And that's part of what's been one of the great rewards and joys of my career, is working with people and serving people. And it was astounding to find that is true in the private industry as well.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting us create a question.
Yeah.
Rob, when are people in a town or city council familiar with the right of way in your experience, or even when a private provider approaches them? Kyle just spoke to the last time a city or town attorney touched a franchise agreement was 30, 40, 50 years ago. You've had to set up franchise agreements, or at least establish rights of way in communities like Wyoming. I think this is about a year ago, a year and a half ago. How do you do that dance?
Yeah, it's varying degrees of experience. Again, we're in a lot of small communities. We don't have a large market. And the city council is tend to be made up of other business owners, community members that have other jobs, and there's a big learning curve for a lot of them. On top of that, most towns, in my experience in my 20 years at Range, there hasn't been a lot of conversation around update of ordinances as it relates to rights of way. But I will say that they're very open to the conversations around what that looks like, very accommodating in our experience for the most part.
I agree. You talked about Kyle, you talked about CPF. When you're handed a project within our organization, what kind of timeline do you have to work with the community?
Yeah, well, I think our goal would be tomorrow, right? We want this done tomorrow, as soon as possible. And the communities are hungry for it too. Realistically, when we get word that we're looking to enter a community, there's some things you got to take into mind. Most of these ordinances that we're going into work will take a 3-reading process. Some communities meet once a month, some meet twice a month. So you got to do some initial research to determine, well, how often are they meeting? Can we work a special meeting if we have to, if it's an urgent project where we have an opportunity and we want to be there? And so you're looking at least probably 3 months just to get through a reading process, and that doesn't entail initial communications with the clerk and figuring out who's going to be your partners in that community to work with. Because oftentimes it's the clerk and the city planners and the engineering teams. They all want to have a say and look at it. Those negotiations can take weeks to months to have. So you got 3 months potential readings you got to go through, maybe a month to 2 months of negotiation back and forth with the city attorneys, and then ultimately an execution. So I always like to say probably somewhere between 6 to 8 months realistically, but we like to work on a quicker timeline, but that's probably your safest bet, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I think from a comment standpoint, I'd like to point out that CPF, before that was CARES, then BEAT is upcoming, and contracts are starting to be signed and completed. That starts a clock, right? And many providers, if they have not established a relationship with the community prior, are starting from scratch. And so I would contend, and Sarah, like your comment on this, I would contend that the providers need to be doing that work before these grants come out. And obviously, a lot of that's hindsight, and a lot of that is me speaking from experience. But how do you bid an area and look at what the costs are to serve? I'm thinking about our project in Buena Vista, Colorado. All the drops are over 300 foot long. All the properties are 5 acres or more. They're what's called big lots. That's the perfect scenario for a grant funded project. But from that standpoint, I believe, and Sarah, I'd like to expound on this, that the provider needs to be a known commodity and established name and have built a relationship with that community prior. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that providers are the subject matter experts on what it takes to build a network. And a lot of the ins and outs of it are not clear necessarily to policymakers or, grant managers. And so having that relationship with the community and knowing, where they're gonna go and what that's gonna take and who they need to talk to and who the right people in the community are to have those relationships with. That's really important to do it up front. I think the BEAD program really did try to bring people together and start those conversations, and the delays just killed it, and things changed and people left jobs. And, now, as people are starting to get their grants and get contracts written, they're having to start that process over to a certain extent. And you really can't be successful in a market if you don't have those boots on the ground relationships. And that's the doer that you're talking about, that the ISP really needs to go out and make those relationships and not rely on anybody else to do that. Because in some of these rural communities, like you said, the people who are the gatekeepers also have 5 other jobs and they're doing this part-time, and they need the support of an active participant to come in and say, hey, this is what we'd like to do. Does this work for you? What are the areas that we need to be concerned about? All of those types of things. So I really do agree that it's really important for the ISP to when possible, start the conversation early and maintain a relationship.
I agree. Rob, you run into, I'm going to spring a question on you here. You run into a utilities director in a small town or a small city. Have they dealt with people using or installing infrastructure recently in your experience?
Not most of them.
How do you build that relationship? How do you work with them?
Again, it's just that partner conversation, and not to use the phrase, it's all about the communication, but it's all about the communication. And if you're really willing to work with them and know that there's an education process on the front end of that, from your perspective as the provider and what it takes to put in that infrastructure, and then make sure you're going through what are their concerns, if they've got questions, and just working alongside them. Because to your point, most of them haven't had to deal with updated infrastructure. One of our projects, they weren't even sure where all the main line for their water was through the town. And it was at varying depths, and it was a challenge for sure during the construction process, but we'd established a relationship on the front end to where it wasn't as tense as it could have been.
I appreciate that. And folks, you might not know this, but Rob hits the road quite a bit because his footprint's from Forsyth, Montana, all the way down to near Cheyenne, Wyoming. And his network powers a lot, not only cellular, but a lot of the telephone company, middle mile and transport throughout Wyoming and parts of Montana. So I've assembled this panel in order for you to be able to ask a question. First, I want to ask a question. How many people looked out the window of their Uber or their shuttle and looked at the fiber in the communication space on the poles from Belgrade to Bozeman? You're coming here from the airport. Just one? Okay, those are the same hands I expected to be coming up when I'm asking for Q&A right now. So I do want to open up this panel for Q&A. I've assembled this panel. I don't want you to hear from a number of bullet points. I want you to be able to ask these folks who have experience with working with communities, talking to providers in Sarah's past, someone that's been established since 1950, someone that's working with a business that's a new commodity in the community. But I'm interested in your questions, and I'd open up the floor. And Melissa over here has a microphone. Come on, those same hands. Oh. There are a lot of broadband options. How do local leaders evaluate the choices, and what should they continue to prioritize long-term fiber investments? What should they continue to prioritize for fiber? Or how should they prioritize it? Everybody hears about AI, everybody hears about data centers, even small towns, the data centers are getting further and further out. How does a small town embrace fiber when they have not seen it prior? I think that's the question.
I'll go back to my last comments just on the education piece, because right now, there's a lot of conversation around AI. Every conference any of us go to, there's at least one AI panel. And where is it all going to land ultimately in the future? We don't know. But what we do know is what's going to power that as far as from a community perspective is going to be a fiber infrastructure. I'd say over the history of delivery of internet around the country, we've underestimated what was needed at every point in history. You know, I remember the conversation when I first started was, who is ever going to need 20 meg of service? I mean, and which is comical now at best, but you know, as history has produced itself, and we don't know again where AI is going, augmented reality, quantum computing, where all this kind of sorts out. We need to make sure we have the infrastructure to handle that. And at this point, the conversation is to figure out fiber.
And at one point in the past, somebody said the phrase, why would we need more than 48 count fiber in a conduit? Right? Kyle, this next one's for you. Actually, they're moving here. People throwing me a curveball. What's the, why would a community raise their defenses when you come into a community? Why, as a new provider, you have to tear down those walls?
Well, that's a good question. I think, well, a couple of things. I think if you're not, once again, if you're not a known commodity, you're starting from ground zero. If you're a known commodity, you got to fall back on your reputation from previous builds. You know, in particular, our Wyoming infrastructure, we're really just one small town with long roads. So that the word of mouth travels from one community to the next. And as we're often working from one community to the next, what we just did in the previous towns already reached the next town by the time you get there. And so if you're doing things the right way and you're putting things in the right places, that reputation will follow you. Without that, I think there's a history of being burned in the industry at times from previous infrastructure that's in place. And so there's that initial fear of you're going to come in, you're going to tear up our roads and our streets, and can we expect that to be the same from you guys? And what are you going to do to treat our community right? So it's a delicate conversation when you're coming into a new community to just start off on the right foot of, you know, maybe fall back to your previous work you've done locally and offer to meet in person. I think that's always a big thing. You can't always be there in person, but offering to be at maybe work sessions with these local communities, to attend if we need to have conversations outside of more formal meeting places, just to reassure and walk through what are our plans, what do we plan to do, how do we plan to address the needs when they come up, who's our point of contact, are you our point of contact, do we have a name and a number, and just being personal about that, I think helps lower those barriers to entry.
I want to build on that a little bit. The franchise ordinances within a community, not every state requires it. Colorado does not require franchise ordinances. Montana's mixed, Wyoming does. And I'm talking about our footprint. Everybody's got to be familiar with their own states. But the interesting thing about it is when you go into a community, and I want to build on what Kyle just said, the community is seeing a decline in telephone revenue from the telephone company, right? They've got a franchise fee that's associated with telephone revenue, not internet. And then they've seen a decline in cable TV revenue, not cable internet, from the cable company. And so these communities are comprised of elected officials that are seeing a decline in that franchise fee. There's also franchise fees associated with gas and other utilities, but they're trying to be responsible for their constituents. And what's most interesting is I want to go back to something Sarah said. The goals of the provider are actually the same as the goals for the community. And there's a question here. What's the first question I ask a community? When's the last time somebody put a utility in your right of way next to a city street? Have you realized that there is a decline in this revenue? But what we're talking about today is not a revenue replacement. It's future-proofing your community. And so I try to turn that conversation. And but it goes back to Sarah, something you said, where everybody's goals are the same. How do you align those goals? How do you talk to someone that has responsibility to their local community to make the best decision for their community? How do you get your goals aligned to begin with?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that, especially coming from my background. I think that one big piece of it is education. I think that there is a lot of unknowns around how building infrastructure happens, and a lot of disruption to the community happens when infrastructure is built. And so if there isn't a lot of upfront communication, both to the public officials, but also to their community about how what they're bringing in is going to affect them, both from the, hey guys, we're just gonna be uncomfortable for a little bit because we're gonna be boring through your yard, to, but in the future, this means that you get to, age in place, that your kids can go to an online school, that you can bank online. One of the things when I was at the state of Colorado that I got to witness firsthand was one of the towns, rural towns in Colorado, decided to name broadband a social determinant of health. And they ran a survey for their constituents about that. And what they discovered is that most of their constituents didn't understand the necessity for broadband. They didn't understand how what was being offered to them was going to affect. And after they ran their survey, their usage skyrocketed. It skyrocketed. And that is the type of thing that needs to be, that's the type of education that needs to be done with communities, is really helping both public officials understand that broadband is one of the last great triggers for economic development in their communities, and for stakeholders that this is actually will materially impact the well-being of your life for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a great communication piece and a great alignment of those two goals. Not everybody in this equation of the champion of the local community and the doer, the fiber provider, not everybody is disparate is the point. This next question is interesting, the third one down. What's one piece of advice you'd give to both local government leaders and broadband providers? And both Rob and Kyle have said this, drive and meet in person. And out here in the West, if you put in the time and you drive and you sit down with folks, that's the same as breaking bread. You're meeting them on their turf, and you're building understanding. From a government leader standpoint, actually, I found the best success, and Kyle, I'd like you to build on this if you could, in understanding the utilities director, understanding the town clerk, understanding who does the locates for the community. If they own their own utilities, they're doing more locates. We've been in some communities recently and they've said, we're gonna let you call in 20 locates a day. That's the most installs you can do in a day because you're overwhelming staff. Kyle, what success have you had on finding a way to build a relationship with someone in a community that then tells the city council that Visioanry is okay to work with?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to think of some recent examples we've had in that. Yeah, I think recently, we just, we had a community, Casper, Wyoming, that we were just working in actually. We had a situation there where we were working with the local officials and some things we needed to clean up, and wanted to be front center to do that. And we had a local business owner who we worked with, and it's kind of my own territory too, that's where I'm from originally. And so actually had them call me and say, hey, can you get a hold of us, let us know who we need to talk to and get this resolved. And so sure enough, I know the right person. I'm a gatekeeper too on my side to a degree, so I get you there. And we ended up showing up and appearing in person. We met before the council meeting with the council members and local businesses and residents, in fact, that were all there, just to ease the tensions in the room and let them know, look, you have boots on the ground, we're gonna make this right. And sometimes admitting you're wrong and we didn't do it right as we should have, but we're gonna get it right. It's a big piece of that too, and just some candid in the room. I think it goes a long ways with working with these communities.
But you received a phone call, so in this conversation that Sarah's talking about, where a community, you're talking to the community about what this means for them, that means at some point you've handed out a business card with your cell phone.
Sure.
Rob, have you done the same?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say another piece of that in building those partnerships that help with the local government piece for those anchor institutions that every community has, the hospital, the school, the library, If it's a county seat and you've got a significant county government presence, they might be able to help on the city side as well. So again, it all comes back to that partnership piece, and you can get assistance from those organizations as well.
Kyle just spoke to construction and you've got some issues to clean up. Construction, clean or messy? What's your experience, Rob?
No comment. Yeah, I mean, again, mixed bag, right? Depends on the project. Sometimes it can be a little messier. You never plan for that, but.
I asked that question because I wanted to see the answer here. I found a lot of building relationship with the community by saying construction is messy.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've done the same, where you just said, once we get through this, we're all going to appreciate what this does long term. But in the short term, it's a little messy. Is that something you've contended with as well, sir?
Oh, yeah. I mean, anytime you're talking to a stakeholder about the process, I always say it's gonna get worse before it gets better.
But it does get better.
It does get better.
And I thank you for your time, and I thank everybody for attending. This is a great venue, and I thank the mayor for having us here, and the state for sending folks here. The people that ran our CPF program are here. We're excited about what we've done in the state. Rob is here. You can definitely grab him in the hallway and talk to him about being in a small community and being responsible for treating the rights of way well and cleaning up the mess after construction. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Much to our panelists there for helping, I think, frame the rest of the conversations we're going to be having today. In my experience, my background is government affairs.